Hey y'all, Wacky here with another Dwarf Fortress tutorial. Last two episodes we talked about the designations menu. So 2 episodes ago we started that by talking about digging, channeling, up and down stairs and ramps, and all the things that are going to let you build your fortress or dig your fortress out of the earth here. And then last episode we talked about the remainder of the designations menu. That was things like chopping down trees, gathering plants, carving fortifications, and then one of the more commonly asked questions about Dwarf Fortress, we talked about how you get rid of all the stone here that's littering your floor. So if you have any questions about that, go check out the last two videos. Feel free to leave a comment in their comment sections if you need any further clarification or anything. In this episode, we're going to talk about workshops a little bit. We're going to briefly scratch the surface of workshops, mostly just talking about them in general and then getting one actually placed down into the world. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the list of workshops in Dwarf Fortress. And we're going to act like we're going to build one. So B for building, and then W for the workshop list. And now these are all the workshops that are there, that are available to be built in Dwarf Fortress. One of the things you'll immediately notice is one of my workshops has a 1 beside it. This means that there is currently a carpenter's workshop present in my world, and it's actually right here in this corner. So you can kind of keep track here of how many workshops of each type you have. So workshops in Dwarf Fortress are categorized into 3 tiers, and those tiers are based on what the workshops require as an input in order to make whatever their output is. So you have tier 1 workshops. Tier 1 workshops require just a raw good in order to produce their output. An example of this would be the butcher's workshop or the butchery, which requires just a livestock animal in order to be brought in, and then he or she would skin it, process the meat, you get bones and all that kind of good stuff. So you take a raw good, comes into the workshop, and you produce your output. Then you have a tier 2 workshop, which at minimum depends on the output of a tier 1 workshop. So the tier 2 workshop does not run unless there's already been a tier 1 producing goods. A good example of this would be the tanner's workshop or the tannery. This workshop requires a skin from the butcher in order to make a leather, right? And then you have tier 3 workshop, which requires the output of a tier 2 workshop, at least. A tier 3 workshop example would be the leather works, which requires leather. Leather is the output of the tannery. Well, the tannery, the tier 2 workshop, required skin, the output of the butchery. So you can see how some of these workshops kind of chain things along. We're going to start with a tier 1 workshop, though, in the mason's workshop. So I'm going to hit plus down here till I get to Mason's workshop. I could have also hit lowercase m if I wanted to search this list. I'm going to press enter. And then I get a nice little 3x3 cursor that's showing me the footprint of the workshop. But you'll notice it also has some different colored X's in there. If I were to move it over a wall, it would change into red and purple. So the purple X's are good, they're fine, but the red ones are bad. Obviously, in this case, it's sitting on a wall. But going back to the green X's, we have bright green and dark green. This is very, very important. So the bright green X's, you don't have to worry about at all. The bright green X's are tiles that your dwarves can pass through perfectly fine. The dark green X's are tiles that your dwarves cannot pass through. So you really need to take note of those dark green X's, especially if you were creating, say, individual rooms for each of your workshops. Or if you were to maneuver a workshop in front of a doorway. If it's a bright green X, it's perfectly fine. They can walk through it, no problem. Doesn't slow them down a bit. If it's a dark green X, it could possibly block that passageway. Now, in Dwarf Fortress, dwarves can move diagonally. So if I were to position this workshop right here, these 2 tiles would be unable to be moved to, but a dwarf could come from the doorway onto this tile. So we could still pass through. There are workshops where a whole side is blocked off, though. And so if I put that blocked side against this doorway here, this doorway would become absolutely useless. So make sure you keep that in mind, especially as you get into the later game and you're starting to kind of design things in your fortress. It really pays off to go ahead and check out the footprints of each of these workshops and make sure it's going to go where you think you want to put it. One of the things I like to suggest, especially for newer players, but I do it myself still, is to start placing your workshops in one large room, especially in the early game. The benefits of this is that if you size your room and place your workshops such that there's a gap in between them, so this is my carpenter's workshop, there's a gap, and then my mason's workshop will start, you're guaranteed to have access to all of your workshops. You can totally ignore the blocked exits. You won't have to worry about them at all. So this is a suggestion I have for beginners, but like I said, I still do it, at least until the late game in my forts. So I'm going to press enter, and we're going to place this Mason's Workshop. And then it's going to ask us for what type of material we want to create this out of. This list is organized in terms of distance from where the workshop is being placed. So it's sort of a scale of how long it's going to take to get this thing built, because they got to haul these materials over to the workshop. It also goes ahead and tells me how many of each material I have. The only effect materials have on the workshop itself is the color. That's the only effect it has. So I'm going to go ahead and select slate, and it's going to build this workshop out of slate as soon as a worker becomes available. Now, it has to be a specific type of worker, and we're going to get to that here. So I'm going to back out to the main menu, and then I'm going to hit the Q key. So Q is set building tasks and preferences. Q lets us look in on a workshop, see what's going on. It allows us to queue up products to be produced. It allows us to take control of the settings, their orders, things like that. So I'm going to hit Q. My cursor is still over that workshop, so I don't have to move it. But it's going to give us some useful information about construction here. Number one, that it's a Mason's Workshop. Next, that it's waiting for construction. So we're waiting for someone to come along and start building. And then the most important part here, that in order to actually build this thing, this is not in order to operate the workshop, but in order to build the workshop, it needs someone with the masonry labor enabled. So a Mason's Workshop requires a mason to build it. No one else can build it. If you followed my Embark tutorial, or if you use one of the several that are available in Dwarf Fortress, you almost guaranteed have a mason available, and you've got a carpenter available. You've got a lot of these very low-level laborers enabled. If you do not, if this building sits here for a while and no one comes along and builds it, then you probably don't have that labor enabled. You need to check out Dwarf Therapist or the Wiki to see how you enable laborers on dwarves. I will get to Dwarf Therapist in a later tutorial, but it's way beyond the scope of this one. So we're going to sit here and wait for the mason to come along, which isn't going to take long. Other things to note on this menu, we can manually suspend construction. So if we want to go ahead and place the workshop but don't want it built immediately for whatever reason, we could suspend it. We could also hit X, and it would immediately remove this building, because right now it's just sort of it's almost a designation of where to put the workshop at this point. There's no material there yet. There's nothing to actually remove, really. So at this point, removal is instantaneous. I'm going to escape out of that. I'm going to hit space to unpause it and allow my mason, which is this guy or girl right here, to come in and start construction. So he or she built it. I'm going to hit Q, and we see that the masonry is fully built and ready to roll. So that's going to finish off this tutorial. Next tutorial, we'll talk about actually giving orders in the workshop, getting things produced, controlling the materials things are produced out of, and all that kind of good stuff. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and I will see y'all in the next tutorial.